Starting our meeting now, and we apologize for our delay. We had some technical difficulties, so thank you for standing by while we got that worked out. Also, please let us know if you can hear us okay, because we're doing the microphones a little bit different tonight as well. So we have all board members here and present, as well as our wonderful cabinet to do some presentations for us. So looking forward to it. Maggie, you want to go ahead and start?
Do we need to approve the agenda?
Oh, yeah, probably.
And then I had a recommendation to add an item to the
Oh,
agenda.
yes.
Just to make sure in the work session tonight, I know upcoming, we're getting into budget season. So I want to make sure if there's any things as we work towards identifying board budget priorities, that we have some time to discuss that tonight. So as Lenita and I build the budget priority presentation that's coming up in November work session, that we've got everything prepared for that, so it's ready to go. So I thought if we could add that to the agenda tonight at the end, we could.
Okay, so
If that's
any,
okay.
any budget items that we think we want to just kind of skim over? Okay,
Yep.
so add budget. All right, so adding budget to the end of the agenda. Do you have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
All right, all in favor? All right, so now we can move on to the review of our CSD grievance policy.
Yes, all right, well, I'm going to introduce Dr. Huddleston and Ms. Walker. Dr. Huddleston is our Associate Superintendent, and Ms. Walker is our Chief Human Resources Officer. And they are going to share a summary of our grievance policy and CSD for students and staff and parents and community. And then we'll open up at the very end after their presentation for any questions and comments from the board. We'll go from there. All right, thank you, ladies.
Thank you. So good evening, everyone. We're going to start with just an overview of board policy connections to these grievance policies and procedures. I'll talk a little bit about the student and community grievances, including Title IX and Title VI. And then I'll turn it over to Ms. Walker, and she'll handle the employee complaint process, and we'll make sure that there's time for any questions you may have after that. So in terms of looking at the connection to the board policy, the first one that I want to highlight is the non-discrimination policy that's in place to protect all of our students and staff from discrimination based on their individual characteristics and culture. And our grievance policies and procedures are in place to investigate and remedy any instances of discrimination. So AR 2.41 highlights our responsibility to adhere to Title VI, Title IX, Title II, and Section 504, as well as the Americans with Disabilities Act. Board policy also dictates that we have procedures in place to address employee and student or community complaints. And so these are the ARs that stipulate that we develop those procedures and monitor those procedures. So we'll start off looking at student, parent, and community complaints and the process for those, beginning with Title IX. So I'm sure that most of you are familiar with Title IX. Title IX is the federal law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. And so here you're able to see that it is the Title IX of the Education Amendments Act of 1972. Title IX guidance and oversight is managed by the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. So in terms of looking at what the district is responsible for under Title IX, it is our responsibility to prevent discrimination, end discrimination when it's reported to us, and remedy the effects of it. And so the first thing is you need to know who to report to for Title IX, and I'm the district Title IX coordinator. So as I mentioned earlier, Title IX prohibits discrimination based on sex in all federally funded educational programs. And this extends to all of the educational experiences, including academics, athletics, co-curricular activities, and extracurricular activities. So there's some key elements that that every district must follow under Title IX. The first one, we must publish a statement that our non-discrimination policy, which we started this presentation with. We must adopt and publish a complaint and grievance procedure and inform the school community of these procedures and how you can resolve these, and designate an employee to be the Title IX coordinator. So most of the information that's needed here is found on our website, and there's a link in the presentation. If you received it electronically, you can go to that and see where all of that information is available to the public. So to dig into a little bit more of what our responsibilities are, if a school district, and when I say school district, this applies to any individual that's working for the school district. If you know or reasonably should have known that sexual harassment has taken place, we must take immediate action to end it. We must prevent it from happening again, and we must remedy the effects. So one of the things that you'll hear me talk about later is even before an investigation is complete, it's important to make sure that we are remedying any potential effects of what has been reported. So in looking at how we might take immediate action, we would be looking at behavior management. It could involve disciplinary action, restorative conference with the Title IX coordinator, social workers, counselors, and other individuals that might be brought in to address the issue depending on the nature of the complaint. And in terms of preventing it from happening again, we are a school district, so we focus on education. It's important to make sure that we are preventing by having our counselors educate on issues related to sexual harassment and discrimination, as well as other school personnel. We prevent through school climate. So next month, you'll hear a little bit about our work with PBIS and how we use that to prevent these sorts of instances and improve school climate. Working to change the environment. So that could be really looking at things like, just making sure that we are setting kids up for success, and we are making sure that there's proper supervision and all of those kinds of things. And then there may be a need for outside resources as well. And then when it comes to remedying the effects, we may look at interim measures. And so that's what I was referring to earlier when I said that even before an investigation is completed, it may be necessary to offer support for an individual that's reporting some of these incidents, such as counseling, a change in schedule for the students, things of that nature, to make sure that we are interrupting and preventing any kind of discrimination from happening. And then post-resolution measures. So at the conclusion, there may be additional measures that need to take place based on the complaint, based on what we learned throughout the process of investigation. So now I'll jump to Title VI and talk a little bit about that. I won't read through the whole thing, but Title VI is focused on making sure we prevent discrimination based on race, color, national origin, and this applies to any program that receives federal funding. So we are definitely a part of that. And if you go into sort of the letter of the law, you'll find out it covers religion and a number of different aspects that we want to make sure we're preventing discrimination. So we're looking at racial harassment, preventing school segregation, making sure that we are not denying services to individuals who are English language learners. And so you can click there to see some of the other areas and really dig into that for more information. So I'll talk a little bit about the informal way. Let the school know that there are concerns related to Title IX and Title VI. So principals serve as Title IX and Title VI liaisons. So they are key people at the schools that parents can go to, that students can go to if they have concerns regarding discrimination. At our larger schools, like the high school, we have Mr. Thomas, who is also a liaison. At the middle school, we have one of our counselors from the Student Center who is a liaison as well. So that we have multiple people that people can go to. I mentioned before that all teachers, all staff members are mandated reporters and can also pass that information and they're required to pass that information along to the principal. So if there is an informal complaint, we would be looking at resolving that through restorative practices, through really investigating what's going on. It may be a disciplinary action that takes place to resolve it informally. And then if there are any complaints that are involving an administrator, then that informal process would be sent to the Equity and Student Services Office for us to be able to serve in the role of navigating an informal resolution at that point. So there are also a number of other ways that people submit informal concerns. And one of them, I think Dr. Banks has shared with you that we have an equity concerns form on our webpage, and people can submit complaints, concerns about any issue related to equity, and you can choose to be anonymous if you submit those forms, or you can include your name. Obviously, we're able to follow up and really delve into it in a different way when we have the name and can then follow up with the individual. But we wanted to make sure that, and there's also a version of that in terms of schools having ways for people to connect directly with their school counselors at Renfro. There's a form where you can make an anonymous complaint or raise a concern that goes to the counselor. And then at the high school, there's the voice box where you can share complaints, and that goes directly to the principal. So those may be some of the other informal ways that people address issues that are coming up. So in terms of formal Title VI and Title IX complaints, those do come to the Equity Office. And there's a pretty elaborate process that we are required to follow, particularly with regard to Title IX. I'm not going to go too deep into that tonight, but I will be happy to answer any questions that you have. Just wanted you to have a general overview of what that looks like. So with this process for Title IX, the first step is there's an accusation of sexual harassment, and a written complaint would come to me as the Title IX coordinator for formal complaint. And at that point, I would immediately reach out to the parent or the student, whoever is submitting this. And then there's a point here where we determine if this is going to go down the route of a Title IX investigation, or if there's a more appropriate way to address the concerns, which often is a disciplinary route to investigate. So there are some key things that are looked at to determine whether or not it's a Title IX case versus another way of approaching it, and I'll get into that in the next slide. But there's one important thing to consider, and that is that as we are doing this work, if there's a complaint against a student may not receive discipline consequences until the investigation is complete, and there's a finding of responsibility. So that's something that's a little different from some of the other ways that we may be investigating. But there is a way that if there's a harmful situation that we can go through a process to temporarily remove a student if there's a situation that can be extremely harmful in the moment for that student to remain in place. So once it's determined that this is a case that we're going to look at through Title IX, we would then go through the process of investigating the case, which includes interviews with all parties that have information about it, gathering information that you may get from a disciplinary report, from school personnel, pulling all of that information together. And this is completed by the investigator for Title IX. That's going to be Dr. Banks. She's the initial investigator for these cases because regulations change. We can't have one person doing all components of the Title IX evaluation and the adjudication. So this just outlines the process. There's a lot that has changed with Title IX with respect to due process and making sure that both the complainant and the respondent have an opportunity to review all the information, and then they have an opportunity to provide feedback about the interviews and every step of the process. And so after all of that's complete, Dr. Banks would then submit a final report at the end of this to me, and we would determine whether it's something that I would make the decision on at that point, or if it would go to a hearing. And so here's another very busy slide with information about how the process could which way it could flow based on what comes up in the initial determination. So this basically, on the left side, it goes down to, yes, it's determined that there's a potential violation, and then there could be a hearing, and we go through that process, or adjudication, as I mentioned, that it's handled within the office. And that's really depending on the nature of the case, who's involved, whether or not we need to go to a hearing or an adjudication, but we do have that option. And then if there's no violation, we would be looking at, maybe it's a student code violation, making sure that there's supportive measures and seeing what else needs to take place. And we have an appeal process, and the appeal process goes to our superintendent, who would be the next person to review the materials and then be able to handle the appeal. So the formal complaint process for Title VI is very similar to what we would do for Title IX. The difference is it's not as prescriptive in terms of what has been given to us by OCR, but we thought it best to follow a similar procedure. The main difference here is that Dr. Banks would handle the initial, receive the initial complaint and then determine the case and then follow through with the investigation from there. And she would, I think it mentions here that it may be necessary to bring in other administrators based on the nature of what's reported. And here for the investigation, you have the interviews, just as we did before, information gathering, and then moving into the adjudication phase. And here, similarly, after the initial determination, then the adjudication, and then also an appeal process to the superintendent if we decide. So I wanted to give you a little summary of what we have seen since I've been in this role, what's been reported thus far. So in terms of informal concerns, ideas, or complaints through our equity form, we've had 56 submitted. And those are addressed within 24 hours. So as soon as we get the report, we are alerted that that has come in, and within 24 hours, Dr. Banks or her designee reaches out to get more information from whomever has submitted this. And then all of the ones that we have received through that form have been resolved informally. And sometimes it's not a complaint, but it's a concern or it's an idea of how we can improve equity in our school district. And if it concerns another department, we partner with that other department. If it's regarding the curriculum, if it's regarding staff, those are, we partner and reach out to those other communities. And people were given the chance to not report their name, so we had everybody report their name. So no one wanted to submit anonymously. And over the course of the time I've been in this role, I've had numerous Title IX, Title VI consultations. And that's because the first step is to call me to talk about what's going on. And so we're able to say, oh, this is probably most likely under code of conduct, and to really talk through issues. And also to make sure that our office is familiar with the kinds of things that are coming up in schools so that we can develop and hone our policies, and we can make sure that our professional learning and things of that nature are addressing what's coming up in schools to be able to prevent any concerns. So that's another thing that comes out of the consultations. I can have my finger on the pulse of kind of what's going on in all the schools to determine what we want to prioritize in terms of training and support for schools. And then as far as formal complaints, there haven't been any formal Title VI, but we have had 2 formal Title IX complaints since I've been in this role. So that is where we are right now, student and parent complaints.
All righty, thank you. It's a pretty hard act to follow. Okay, all right. Good evening, Madam Chair and Madam Vice Chair, and Dr. Fervin, and to everyone on the board. Thank you for this opportunity for us to just review our employee complaint procedures. But before we do that, I would like to just do a general overview of our employee protection, which is our AR 2.6C3. All right, the purpose of this AR is to communicate the district's commitment to providing all employees a safe, enjoyable work environment that is free from harassment and retaliation. Also define the types of harassment, establishing expectations on reporting, clarifying how to report and who to report the incidents to, and then establishing the district's commitment to having dialogue between staff and immediate supervisors. And we use it as a coaching and counseling tool. And then also outlining the disciplinary process. In this AR, we do have a no harassment and non-discrimination statement, which states the district will not tolerate unlawful harassment against anyone at any time for any reason. It is not CSB's intent to regulate personal morality, but to ensure that all employees are free from unlawful harassment while they are at work. And specifically, CSB does not tolerate unlawful harassment or discrimination of any employee, applicant, vendor, or contractor because of all the protected categories that are listed here by an administrator, supervisor, other employee, vendor, visitor, or other individual. All right, the overview of this AR, we will go into the types of harassment. And although we are unable to foresee everything that would constitute harassment, but the policy does list conduct, including requests for sexual favors, offensive gestures and language, and bullying, which can create an unprofessional and hostile work environment. The district does not allow any forms of retaliation against employees who in good faith report unwelcome conduct, report unethical behavior, report harassment, or who cooperates in an investigation of these reports by providing factual information. Also, reporting and the duty to report. We as a district, sometimes we are not aware that harassment and discrimination is occurring in the workplace. So it is important for us to reiterate to all of our staff if they are subjected or they witness these situations, that is important to report it to their immediate supervisor or to the HR department, under superintendent or a member of the superintendent's cabinet of whomever they feel comfortable with. Also, the incident may be reported again to the immediate supervisor and to the dedicated email address that we do have set up, which is staffconcerns@csdecatur.net. And that is managed and oversaw by myself and our HR generalist in our department. What is expected of the employees? As you know, it is important that we do have a mutual relationship with our employees. And so in this section, it explains in details the expectations of the employees as well. The employee handbook, our current job descriptions, and our administrative regulations are all great resources to outline the expectations of employees. And also expectations are established during the evaluation process. Progressive discipline, that is the agreed approach for the district in circumstances in which the district needs to take disciplinary action toward an employee. Corrective action, if the corrective action is necessary, we do have different steps and levels in the disciplinary, progressive disciplinary process, and which is typically our verbal warning, written warning, suspension with or without pay, the release of employment, and intermediate steps may be included but not required, which are performance improvement plans and administrative leave pending an investigation. And then lastly, the disciplinary process states that immediate supervisors are expected to have ongoing dialogue with staff. And this is also cultivating our culture of check-ins with throughout the district to just make sure that anytime a supervisor is approaching you, it's not in a disciplinary action way, but actually having that ongoing check-in with their employee and their staff. All right, So now that we have pretty much looked at that AR, we will now go into the employee complaint procedures. The purpose of this AR is for all certified and classified employees that have the right to present and resolve complaints affecting the employment relationship at the lowest level as possible. When a resolution is not reached at this level, then this AR provides guidance through the formal complaint process. So what is a complaint? According to this AR, a complaint means any claim by a certified or non-certified employee who is affected in his or her employment relationship by an alleged violation, misinterpretation, misapplication of statutes, policies, rules, regulations, or written agreements with the district with which he or she is required to comply. What is not subject to the complaint process? It is performance ratings, terminations, non-renewal, demotion, suspension, transfer, or reprimand, the revocation, suspension, or denial of certification, and anything that has been previously presented to the Board of Education, any claim. All right, the informal process. The district encourages all employees to resolve their complaint informally in the spirit of collegiality where possible. The informal process of reporting a complaint, again, is the same to report to your immediate supervisor or to the Human Resources Department. Again, we do have the staff concern dedicated email box. And then at that point, the immediate supervisor and the complainant will have that conversation. And if it's necessary, then I will be involved in that process as well as the superintendent if need be. All right, during the informal complaint process, if the resolve is not there, it's not resolved at the informal process, then it will, if the complaint is not satisfied at that level, then they have the right to pursue the complaint through the formal complaint process. And in order for this to be considered a formal complaint, the complaint must be in writing. It must be delivered to the HR department via US mail, FedEx, US, or other carriers, pigeon, however it gets there, or hand delivered. And if it is hand delivered, then it is the responsibility of my office or designee to give them a receipt once we receive that complaint. The superintendent as well can give that receipt as well. The complaint must include correct mailing address, the reference or description of the complaint, of the policy that is being violated, a brief statement of facts, and then a statement of relief. All right, the formal grievance process has 4 levels. The level 1 hearing, level 1, I'm sorry. The complaint is afforded the opportunity to be heard and present evidence to the level 1 administrator. The level 1 administrator is normally the immediate supervisor. If the complaint is against the immediate supervisor, then the chief HR officer or designee will be assigned to be the level 1 administrator. If the chief HR officer is the immediate supervisor, then the superintendent or designee will serve in that capacity. The level 2, if the complainant is dissatisfied with the decision at level 1, then they may appeal the decision of the level 1 administrator, and the decision will be made or decided by the level 2 administrator. No new evidence will be presented at the level 1. Everything that was presented in level 1, I'm sorry, will be the only evidence that will be presented in level 2 hearing. In level 3, if the complainant is dissatisfied with the results in level 2, then they may appeal the decision to the superintendent. The level 3 hearing shall be confined to the record, evidence, and testimony presented in level 2. No additional evidence or testimony will be considered. And then the last level, which is level 4, if the complainant is dissatisfied with this decision of the superintendent, they may appeal to the Board of Education. The office of the superintendent shall deliver the appeal to the chairperson of the Board of Education. And then the chairperson will have that discretion if they would agree to the hearing and schedule the hearing at that time. The grievance timelines in this policy in level 1, once we are in receipt of the complaint, then we have 60 days to schedule the level 1 hearing. Within those 60 days, the complainant we will have to notify the complainant 10 business days before the date of the hearing. And then once the hearing has taken place, then the level 1 administrator has 10 business days to give the complainant the written decision. And then as you can see, level 2 and level 3, they pretty much mirror each other in the time constraints and timeline of the grievance process. In level 4, it will pretty much proceed back to the level 1, basically letting you know the complaint and having the written process the same as level 1. All right, an additional overview of the policy. The record keeping, all proceedings shall be accurately recorded and evidence introduced at each level will be preserved in electronic format to the fullest extent as possible. Time limits, the administrator and the Board of Education has the authority to maintain order at any hearing provided under this policy. Legal representation, the complainant and the administration are entitled to the presence of legal counsel and anyone assisting in evidence only at level 4. At level 1, 2, and 3, only the complainant and the administrator and any witnesses other than the complainant and the administrator are prohibited at levels 1, 2, and 3. All costs and fees are borne by the policy and by the party, incurring them unless otherwise agreed by the parties involved. All right, and reprisals. The district does not tolerate any form of retaliation against the employees who have filed a complaint or have participated in the investigation. And last but not least, the certified and classified employees employed here at the district are subject to the terms and conditions of any contract of employment entered into between the district and the employee. All right, staff awareness and accessibility. It is our responsibility as a district to make sure that all staff are aware of all of our employee protections and the means of reporting any concerns that they do have. During our new hire orientation, we go over the policies and procedures to extensive measures as you come in as a new hire into the district. Also, part of our 30, 60, and 90-day check-ins, we go over the policies as well, again, just to make sure that culture check-ins are instituted in with our new hires. You can also look at the ARs at on the CSE website. Teacher engagement surveys, we actually sent out teacher engagement surveys at the beginning of last school year, and then also at this year with our new hires. The employee handbook during staff meetings, building signage, and again with the dedicated email inbox. All right, for the last 3 fiscal years, the informal or formal complaints, we have had 8 informal complaints, which all were settled at level 1. and they may have involved myself or the superintendent at that level. And then we've had 3 formal complaints, which were all decided and written. The written decision was settled at level 1. Alrighty, how to prevent a grievance. And to me, this is one of the most important slides that we do have tonight, because I believe with the culture that we do have here in the district, one of our main objectives is to make sure that our staff are comfortable with having a dialogue with immediate supervisors and making sure that our, like I said, culture of check-ins is present in everything that we do, and making sure that we are looking at all of our initiatives in the equity and inclusion lens as a district. And so we can identify potential causes, prevent employee engagement, promote employee engagement, address correct concerns promptly, active listening, provide leadership and supervisory training, and being consistent. And then right here, there's a few opportunities for improvement, just as things that I have witnessed in managing this this process within the district since I have been in this position. One is the respondents notification if the complaint is against them. Also, participation in the level hearings. Additional means to report complaints. Actually, the number of the levels in this grievance policy, and then also how many days does it take to provide a written decision, and that is actually for levels 2 and 3. 4 does say that it is 20 days. You do have 20 days to do that, so that is a correction there on that slide. And that is it. That is the overview of the complaint process. So at this time, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Gina, and thank you, Lily. Couple things as they were sharing that I wanted to note for the board. When Ms. Walker was sharing about the desire to resolve things informally, that leans on our belief in restorative practices of the district, as we want to try to build those positive relationships amongst our staff and supervisors and between equal staff members. And if there is an opportunity to do a restorative conference that will resolve the issue, that's our first desire. And that's when we say we want to try to resolve it as informally as possible. That's that level where we incorporate restorative processes there. And I also wanted to point out Lily's comment about that cycle of keeping track of the data about what complaints are coming in, having the opportunity to review that data, and then looking at it on a regular basis. Okay, what policies, procedures, or practices do we need to work on as a school district? What additional training may be needed for supervisors to make sure that they're more sensitive to the staff that they work with? And when Adina was sharing the last slide about areas for improvement, one of the areas that I've touched on earlier when I first came in is, as we look at this grievance policy, one of the things that as we take a review of it, what is a complaint process if someone has a complaint against the superintendent? So to make sure that there are clear protocols in place for if someone is upset or I've done something that I shouldn't have done, that there is a way to hold me accountable in the role that I serve. Because as I am kind of in the upper level of leadership, that we need to make sure that we've got a clear procedure in place so that that concern can be taken care of. So thank you, ladies, for this presentation. Very thorough. Thank you for putting that together. Board members, any questions or comments? Go, yeah.
My first question is whether or not there's a separate regulation that we often talk about in connection with these. That's called the Employee Protection AR, which is it's supposed to be AR 2.63. It appears that we're not talking about that today.
That was, yeah, she did. That was part of her presentation. That she's talked about that before she went into the grievance policies.
So it's not presented in our book. I see a slide called employee protection, but the slide doesn't address employee protection. The way that when we wrote that policy, the discussion was, and I thought the early drafts of it were, the protections for the employee, not the way that the employee can make a complaint against others, But what are the defendant's rights, the respondent's rights? And so what procedures, if you are accused of something, what protections does the employee have to make sure that they're given a fair shake? And I mean, that's 2.63, it's to establish procedures to be followed in the event an employee is subject to discipline. But it's from the employee's perspective, not the complainant's perspective. And it looks like we just completely missed that aspect, which is the intent behind 2.63. And maybe that 2.63 needs to be clarified, but it needs to be addressed because we discussed this quite a lot. That the employee needs some protections against complaints they might want to contest. So I just note that it's kind of a large hole in what we've done, needs to be filled. I know that there was work done on that, so I don't know what happened to it, but somehow that's been, it's a major concern of mine, that somehow that got missed.
So let me clarify. So what you're wanting to know is if someone makes a complaint against me, how am I protected in the process?
Yeah, and really the concern here wouldn't frankly be you, but
Right.
be the lower level employee that's been accused of something. They have some procedural rights too. That and in the drafting of this, the board was very clear that they should have those rights and wanted to extend it to them. And there was a process where David Adams had been working with some employees to put that together. I know a lot of effort went into it. I don't know what happened to it. When I asked earlier if it had ever been completed, it was my understanding that it happened.
That's the AR that you have in front of you. That's
Well,
the
it's not
one.
here.
The protection one is not, I thought did we not put the
Yeah,
protection one in their packet?
And then that was part of one of the reasons why I was saying that opportunities for improvement, because that is something that we have noticed whenever there is a complaint. What is the right and protection of the respondent?
Right.
And what is their role in each level if
Right.
there is a form of complaint?
That's supposed to be. I mean, I hear you telling me that it's here, but I don't see it. And so if there's something that's supposed to address that, not from, it's not this package.
Exactly, you're talking about right in the actual.
I'm talking about the board policy 2.6(3) calls for an employee protection administrative procedure. It appears to me just hasn't been developed.
And that, like I said, that is part of what we were here, kind of discuss, just exactly where can we improve the AR.
That's fine. That's all good. I want to make sure though that it's super clear that it's not been done. It needs to get done.
I thought that was done.
Reinterpret
Yeah.
some policies. But a related question is a little bit different, but I wanted to make clear my understanding that what we have our complaint, we have several different procedures for different types of complaints. And the statement was made that the grievance procedures exist to enforce discrimination, anti-discrimination, or Title 6. But it's written it's beyond that. It's that everyone's understanding that if I want to make a complaint as an employee, or a student, or a parent, I don't have to allege discrimination. I can make a complaint based on investigator status or anybody's failure to comply with any of our policies and rules and regulations. So they're here to enforce anti-discrimination, but also just to enforce policies generally. So it's not limited to that box. We're clear about that?
I agree with that, and that's why I wanted to highlight the equity concerns throughout, and the fact that formal complaints or just complaints in general always go to the principal, and local schools address myriad issues and concerns that are coming up. But given that, I just show how this ties to the various policies and procedures, because there are certain things that are to follow. Complaints over the school level, and
And these procedures would be available to those people. It's not that we're granted. You can file a complaint under these procedures, whether it's anti-discrimination or it's a violation So that leads to my last question, which might be more of a comment, which I found the presentation to be a little bit confusing, because it's like, okay, so now I have to understand the difference between Title 9, Title 6, and this before I go make my complaint. And I'm wondering, could we not have a single grievance procedure? So if I've got a complaint, I file a complaint. I file it with the person who would both be the Title 9 coordinator and the Title 6 coordinator and the grievance coordinator. And then and don't put it on the burden on the complainant to figure out how to do this stuff. So if you have a complaint, file it with Dr. Huddleston. And then Dr. Huddleston will be the router and figure out where it goes. We've got one set of procedures as far as the complainants are concerned. And then it would be your responsibility to figure out if it's Title 9, Title 6, or it's a violation of rules outside of the statutes. To me, it would seem much easier to follow, much more accessible to people than I found this presentation, my head was a little bit swimming. Part of it is because I was looking for regulations and I wasn't quite sure what it was. It seems like we could simplify this from the user standpoint.
So that's definitely good feedback. I'll tell you that the form that people can use for complaints, it has all these different areas, you know, that we might be looking at or other. It doesn't really say Title 9 or Title 6. It's just if you have a concern, you know, write it here and we do exactly what you are describing. All of these things for students and community do come to my office, and then we look at it from there. And even with the calls from principals for consultation, that's another method where I'm sort of looking at it from the various angles. So the forward-facing, sort of outward-facing information that parents are able to obtain. Yes, we have the information that we're required by law to put on the website and make sure is accessible. When it comes to click on this to submit your complaint, there's a range of things there. And then we determine like which route it needs to go at that point. And there may be room for improvement and ways to simplify that as well. And we can do that and take that under consideration.
It might be that it's just the difference between presenting to us and the way it presents to the public, and that's fine. So
That was my understanding. I got that this graph was more for us to kind of get a better understanding of how things go in the background versus, you know, if somebody goes on the website and gets wants to file a complaint, they're not getting all of these graphs and
That's
which way do I go and which way is,
Right.
okay.
That's,
wanna make
that
sure.
graph is not on the website at all.
Okay.
It's just to provide you with a little background information.
And it's the same way with the staff as well. I mean, they're not, you know, jumping through hoops just to make a complaint. It is, they can, you know, email directly to me and not necessarily go to the staff concern email box. That is just there for this repository for all of us to be there together. But if they want to make that complaint directly to their supervisor, if the supervisor thinks that it, you know, relevant enough for us to get involved, then it is a simple process for us to bring it all together and try to, like I said, resolve it in the informal process.
yeah, I'll just, my final comment is that historically, there have been incidents that have come before the board where this type of clarity actually turns out to matter a lot. And so when you read the policy, you think, well, I understand this. This makes sense, and this is the intent. But when someone is actually angry with us, and there's actually a complaint that's on the table, people are going to flyspeck the language of the procedures. We've had it on both sides. We've had employees trying to get around the letter, and we've had administrators using the letter to say, well, you might think that's what it means, but that's not what you're going to get to do. And so it turns out that in this context, we have to be very clear, to be very careful and precise in the language. We should, you know, if we haven't, we should make sure that the lawyers have looked at the draft and maybe with an eye to clarity, because we've gotten bit by these things on both sides of it. That's it.
I have a question, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about the process when particularly like the equity complaints or just the general complaints come to you. What is the full circle in terms of how we, evaluate what these complaints are and whether there's a root cause or a trend and how we resolve and like, what's the full circle process for these that don't end up going down the legal path?
So I think the process can look a little bit different depending on the nature of the concern. But in general, when we get the initial concern, we reach back out to the person who's presented the concern to get more information, because we're trying not to make additional hoops for people to give us a full report. So it's basically Dr. Banks reaches out to interview people who submitted complaints through that form. And then once we find out the nature of it, some of the things are informative to policy in the future. So it may be something that can't be directly addressed in that moment, but it's something that informs our future work. Sometimes there is something that we directly can support the schools in looking at. If there's been a concern raised where, we can support the school in making sure that we're applying an equity lens to that. So it might be working in consultation with the principal or a counselor or whomever was identified in that concern, and then we go back to the parent. There could be a restorative conference that happens. So on a number of these occasions, after getting to the root of it, we see that there's miscommunication at the root of it. If that's the case, then formal restorative conferences have been very helpful, because then we're able to bring all the parties together to talk through it. And then if there is a need to change a procedure at the school or change a practice, then that recommendation is also made to be able to do that. And so in the case when it's a conference, everybody hears everything. Everyone's hearing the complaints and they hear what the resolution and the next steps are. And so it's the practice in our office to call and follow up after we've given the recommendations, to then see, just a check-in, how is this going now, and to follow up. So that whole cycle, we have a process for following it, and even after, say, a resolution of a conference, to make sure that things are still moving in the right direction. And if they're not, we're open and ready to receive feedback on that and continue to work with individuals. So we have what I sort of think of as short-term, things that we can immediately put an action in place, and then we have things that we say, okay, this informs how we need to move forward and make sure that our policies are moving in a different direction.
I have a couple questions. Sure. I just want to clarify, you can file a form. I know that it is encouraged to start with an informal complaint, try to have the issue resolved there. But in both scenarios, student complaints and employee complaints, you can just complaint. You don't have to start with the informal formal complaint. I'm asking.
That is true. I mean, it because if a staff member is coming to us with a formal complaint, it is written, it's in the format, then I'm not able to say, okay, no, you need to go back to that formal process.
Okay.
So we would start the time clock, from that time of receipt of that complaint, and then follow that through the formal process.
Same for students.
Okay. And then I was curious as to why there's not an electronic formal, why it has to be a hard copy in writing, and why a formal complaint can't be submitted electronically.
So for the student process, we are accepting electronic, but it's still written, it's still a written request, because the regulations have changed and we were able to make that change for the students. So I'm not certain if that might be something to look at in the future, but that is something that we have changed. So for us, it just said written, which can also be email.
For what it's worth, I had the same question. Seems like we should allow people to file stuff. Seems unreasonable to require paper shows.
Right, exactly. And then, I mean, that's something that we could definitely look at in amending the procedures, because you're right. I mean, we're living in a time where we were not even in the building. So if someone had a complaint, how could you hand deliver? So you're right, that's something that we need to just catch up with the times and make sure, and that will also afford us an opportunity to give you a receipt electronically as well.
Right, because that was my next question about the receipt. And I was was a little confused because it said for hand delivered, you need to request a receipt, but I was wondering if someone sent a request, if they sent their formal complaint via mail, should they also do the process where they're asking for a signature for those other types of deliveries? So it's for, they need to, as it stands right now, FedEx, UPS, all those different types, including hand delivery, you need to request a receipt.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to having that correct mailing address, because we would send that receipt back to them via email, via mail. And most of the time we would do a certified, so we can get that signature that they received it.
Okay, all right, because I was a little confused because the way it's worded in here, it's like if it's hand delivered, and you request a receipt. But I think electronically would be optimal.
Right.
And then my last question was, Dr. Huddleston, you mentioned that we had 52 informal and 2 formal complaints since you've been in this role. I just wanted to clarify the time frame. That's been about 6 months.
No, I was talking about since I've been the Title IX
Oh,
coordinator,
okay,
and so that was 2018.
okay, thank you.
Okay. And board, I did email you a link to the Employee Protection Administrative Regulation. It is posted on our website. So it
We
is,
do have it.
we did, yes.
Good.
Yeah. Sorry, it didn't make it into your packet, but it's on our
Well,
website.
I couldn't understand how it got dropped.
Yeah, it's on there. It's in there, yeah.
Dr. Olson, I have the same question. So I wrote down 56, you characterize them as ideas / complaints. What happens with those ideas?
Oh, we have a dream bank for so many of these ideas. So a lot of these ideas inform our next steps as a department. So a lot of them have been about ways to provide additional support to schools. Some of the ideas are about our policies and procedures. So we keep those, and as we are coming up with the next iteration of the code of conduct, we've got some ideas regarding the dress code, regarding a number of different issues. And so we take those, and as we're working on the next iteration, we bring that in to revise our policies and procedures. And then some of the ideas are things that we can act on immediately, and so we jump on as many of those as we can. And then the others, we're working toward that. And then often we find that partners are able to help us with some of those. So we get some ideas and we reach out to DEF, we reach out to other people in the community, because we have a small but mighty equity department. And so it's important for us to make those connections as well. But we keep all of them, and then Dr. Banks has them all categorized. And then we meet regularly and figure out how we can, implement those ideas.
Oh, that's good to hear.
How do you incorporate the student voice to get feedback when you're thinking about making a policy change or a change to, say, the code of conduct or the dress code or whatever it is?
So as far as the student code of conduct, we have students on the committee every year when we revise it. So that's one way for student voice. We also work with students throughout the year in a number of different ways. So the Decatur Student Center has been very helpful with that process. And so there are multiple surveys that go out to students to find out, what do you need in terms of support with the Student Center? And that also informs what professional learning our staff may need and what policies we may want to change and highlight. And in terms of sexual harassment, there are students who have been working on forming a group to make sure that students know there's no place for that type of behavior. And we have tapped in to have them help us with making posters, have them help us with all of these things. So it's not me sitting in an office coming up with what I think will appeal to students, but students are saying, hey, this speaks to me, and we want to make sure that voice is coming forward. So I've met with several high school students about the issue of preventing sexual harassment, and they have groups that we're partnering with to be able to work with them hand in hand as we go through the year to support what they're doing, but also to make sure that they're helping to inform our policies and practices.
So since you've been in this role, do you feel like the complaints, has there been an uptick? Do you feel it's stayed pretty stable? do you think, and do you feel like the parents and the community know about the access to getting to you? Do you feel like you're hearing from people enough?
I do feel like people are informed about how to reach out to us. We do get a lot of people that connect, not even through the concerns form, but just through our emails to me, to Dr. Banks. So I think that people are aware of how to reach out to us. And as far as looking at the trajectory of, complaints, during the COVID period, I'll just say everything was quiet, more quiet. But that's because we were dealing with so many other things. So I was getting more questions and concerns regarding COVID. So in the other aspect of some of the work that I'm involved with, but there was less. But then as we started to come back, and really reintegrate into being in person and having more people in person, some of those things are coming to the surface. And I think it also is a parallel process to what's going on in our nation. So we'll see upticks and things of that nature because people are having those influences and things that are happening in our community and in our state, and then reactions to that.
Right.
Because parents want to know, hey, how do we respond to this that's coming up in the state of Georgia? How are we going to move forward and those kinds of things?
Thank you.
One of the quick questions just came up last night in the panel that was held by the Decatur Justice Coalition. Voice box.
Yes.
I'm not familiar with that. What is the voice box?
So the voice box is a way that students can report any concerns regarding equity or other issues at the high school. And so there's a QR code and it's around the building, and students can directly make complaints and they can remain anonymous, or they can identify themselves, and then the principal and her staff look into whatever concerns are coming up there. And they directly address them. And then if they need any partnership from us with that, then they reach out to Dr. Banks, or they reach out to me or anyone else that they need to bring in.
And as a follow-up, so how has that gone? Are you seeing or noticing that that's being used as well at the high school?
So it is being used. I don't have the numbers on that because that's really managed at the
Right.
school level, and that's something that that Rochelle is very passionate about, and making sure that she is on top of anything that comes in. But I don't have the exact numbers,
No,
but
that's
I do know that the students know about it.
Right.
It's very accessible for them, and they get an immediate response.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Any questions?
All right, thank you both.
Thank you, ladies. Have a good evening. You're welcome to stay if you want to. All right, come on up, Jeff. Sergio is at a conference, so he's going to engage via Zoom. But we do have Jeff, and he is going to kind of walk through some presentations on our 5-year master plan. And this is just an annual update. So every year we're looking at, okay, what's the next iteration of this plan? And just so you are aware, this is the very first part of this plan. Particularly, this one is enhanced because the SPLOS is a possibility of extra revenue for making some of our long-term plans a reality. So this is the first time we're really looking at what are some next big capital projects that we could implement. And as I said, this is just the very first iteration to get the board's feedback to kind of help you see the next steps that we're looking at. I do want to make sure that this is completely open. If whatever decisions are made, we will go through a rigorous stakeholder engagement process, get feedback from our community. This is just the initial proposal to the board to get your kind of temperature read on where we're going. Are we headed in the right direction? Do we need to look at some other options so that we can make sure we're planning for our future and we don't end up in a point where we have 500 kids in modulars outside the high school. We want to make sure we plan ahead for that. We are seeing growth in the district. It is kind of steadied out. It hasn't been this exponential growth that we were possibly anticipating. So we have some more reasonable options for the board to consider as we look at some growth planning. Both the options, when we talk through them, do require some redistricting conversations. Those are going to be some very upfront conversations about how we could possibly redistrict. You'll see an option for a new lower elementary school. You'll see an option that includes a new upper elementary school. We're going to see our capacity reached at Fave and at Tally. So we want to make sure that when we are looking at that possibility, where does that go? What does that look like? How do we support the growth, but also maintain a very equitable distribution of our students across all of our school zones? So that's kind of the preface to set the groundwork for this. And then Jeff, any other things that I should make sure I add? I had my
No,
list
I
here.
think it was a great start. I
Okay.
appreciate wonderful intro.
Yes.
It's good evening. It's been a moment since I've had an opportunity to sit down with you guys, and I'm glad to be back in front of you tonight. As we were stating, obviously everything starts with basically the April 29th, 2021 analysis that was done by Corporate Strategies. We started using that as our idea of looking at the projections and where we were headed, both in all aspects of the school district. And this is not going to stay up, so I'm trying.
Just do your best, you're fine.
Right. So we started looking at just the overall enrollment. Of course, now these numbers, specifically in the last couple of years, have been, there is a COVID effect. So those numbers are going to be just a little bit off. But the idea is to show you the trends and where we're headed. So as you can see in this particular slide, as we get out into, 1 to 2 years out from where we are tonight, you can actually see where these schools begin to have capacity issues. Winona Park is the lone school in the lower elementary bracket that is having capacity issues. The other ones are doing fairly well, staying in the 80 percentile range or less. In the upper elementary school, both are starting to have projection issues and capacity issues. And then when we get to the middle school does well. It basically stays in the 80s throughout the next 5 years. The high school really begins to struggle about 3 years out. And actually that's in general classrooms, but it's actually struggling today for physical education space and for CTAE space. So we'll
College career technical.
College.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about those tonight as well. This begins to show you where there's a density map, kind of show you generally what the student per square mile looks like in the jurisdiction itself. You can see obviously downtown is very, very dense. Then you can see the pockets that go in there. And then of course the little dots are the schools associated with those. And then we start looking at the projections by the projected utilization by boundary. So this is 2021, 2022. You can see obviously Winona is having capacity issues. Both upper elementary schools are struggling. Obviously Tally is reaching capacity. Middle and high school are doing well.
And I just want to go back one more slide for you, Jeff. So we do know currently at Winona Park, we do have still modular classrooms there. So they already are over capacity and we are full. We took some modulars away, but we still have learning cottages at Winona Park that are being utilized for actual regular classroom space. We do have some modulars at Oakhurst and Fade, but they're not for like clip classrooms. Like a second grade class is not in the modular. They use them for like gifted pull out. So when we talk about buildings getting over their utilization projection, it's for all the classrooms that are assigned, not necessarily the specials classes and the gifted enrichment classes. They look at that building capacity a little bit differently. So I just wanted to make sure you realize that, so that we do have modulars at 3 sites, but we are only using them for actual like classroom assignments at Winona Park.
Okay. This is projected for 22, 23. You can see Winona continues to stay in control. At this point, Tally and Fifth Avenue kind of switch places a bit, and they'll do that for the next couple of years. The middle school is doing great. Now the high school begins to get in the yellow.
And I'll tell you, the high school is already having to utilize classroom space during teacher planning. So there are teachers that have offices and then rotate into classrooms to teach their classes, the same at Fifth Avenue. So they do have to have some opportunities where there's teachers in a, like they have kind of set up an office space, really it was a storage room, that's now their office space, and then they rotate to other classrooms during the day to teach their classes.
And as we get into showing you the actual plans, you'll begin to see, we're starting also to think about common areas that can be used for multiple purposes throughout the day as well. And this kind of gives some relief in addition to the general classrooms. And then this gets into 23-24. You can see both upper elementary schools are at their 100% capacity. And then the high school stays in yellow, Winona is still red. And then 24-25, you can see now the high school pops up red. So what was our conclusions? For the lower elementary school system, obviously Winona Park is reaching its capacity really now. So how do we address that? Well, we know that we don't want to build a super large elementary school. We like that neighborhood concept. I mean, that is kind of the calling card for this school district. So we want to try to make sure that we distribute that, that excess, the need for capacity within the system. So, but we also know that Winona has some very specific needs that is needed for really the last almost 10 years. One is the renovations and expansions of the admin, the media, physical education, art and music suites, and then the kitchen and serving areas. So we're going to talk about a plan on how we can address that. And then the other thought is, well, if we are to build a new ECLC, that opens up College Heights to be converted back to a lower elementary school. And it also allows us to do it for a capacity about 325, which is almost identical to Winona Park itself. So it's something to consider.
And one of the, and I'll just add this, one of the things that we kind of fleshed out before this presentation was adding classroom space at Winona Park. But that would put it up to a 600 number of students. And in our communities, we know that we, really love that community school feel. So if that is something the board wants to kind of look at, okay, instead of we're converting College Heights, could we look at adding to Winona Park or another school? That's another option as well. So just something to kind of think about. For me, I feel like these small lower elementaries are what make Decatur a special school district and get that just kind of personalized feel for your community. So that's why we prioritized converting College Heights to a lower elementary.
Now, obviously, College Heights, the only way College Heights comes available is that we make so that there's, there's always the chess moves, right?
Yes.
That goes along with it. So to address the upper elementary school needs, we realize that Tower Street is at that number, that capacity that we want to keep it at 675. But obviously, Fifth Avenue is sitting at a capacity of 487. So we have a plan that we'll put forward tonight of how we can renovate and expand that and get those two almost identical in size, about 700 capacity. But that still doesn't get us the added capacity that we need to address all of the next 5 years growth in the upper elementary. So the idea would be if we were to build a new ECLC, let's go dense. Let's reuse the property that we have, and let's go build a second story. And that second story would be where we'd have the actual upper elementary school, and we'd have the capacity to do about 250 students there. And that one would be also kind of co-located at the Trinity Commerce property across the street. So obviously we talked about the ECLC. This particular option that you'll see tonight pretty much takes care of doubling each of the age groups for the ECLC. In some cases, a little bit more than double. And at the high school, the idea is that we would, and we have in our master plan, both of these components, a new physical education space, and then a classroom building that would also have CTA and general classrooms. And they could be, the beautiful thing about designing it is we can design them as multi-purpose. They can be used and be converted in both directions as we need it. And then athletics. Obviously, we were very, we don't have a whole lot of dirt around here for athletics, and we've never had our own track. But this is not, we're going to show you an opportunity tonight to join forces and partner with the city of Decatur on developing that new legacy park, which will have a track and a competition field and athletic complex. And so those were kind of the conclusions that we wanted to talk about tonight. Let's talk about Lower Elementary School, Winona Park. Current capacity 325. It doesn't have a dedicated gymnasium. It has basically just an outdoor pavilion that is used for physical education. That does not meet the requirements of DOE. The media center is too small, admin space is too small. The music and art suites are inadequate for the number of students that we have. So what we're planning on proposing to you is a dedicated 5,000 square foot gymnasium. This addition back here would have the dedicated gymnasium, 2,500 square feet of a media center, 2,500 square feet of admin space. And then we would take the old media center and we would renovate that into proper sized music and art suites. And then we would infill the little area that you see right there where the kitchen is and expand it and also build a really nice serving area that would work there as well. So generally, this is what, yes, sir.
So on the last slide, the arts and music would be the square that's inside there.
I'll show you, that's actually the kitchen on the inside there. So let's go, I'm gonna skip over to one slide and show you, go right there. So that's where the current media center is right now. So if we build the new media center, then obviously this is now eligible for something else. And it actually works really well as an art and music suite, provide just the right size. And then going back down to the lower level, this is where we have the new administrative space, media center, and then gymnasium. Now, obviously, as we said, there's, of any school, this one has probably more ability to expand if we wanted to. And we have an option where you could actually take this addition and make it larger in 2 stories, and you could get general classrooms if you want. But then, the capacity gets up to around 600 and kind of breaks that concept of the smaller elementary school. And then there's that. Then obviously the conversion at College Heights, this is the existing floor plan. And while you think that there's not a whole lot to be done here, there's a lot of opportunity to kind of renovate and kind of get the classrooms at the proper size. DOE would like you to have 750 square foot classrooms. Some of these meet that, some of them don't. The media center and art and music aren't sized properly, and it doesn't have a gym. It doesn't have a gym that doesn't have proper admin space. So this is what we would talk about doing. The orangey areas would be just renovation, where we would upgrade and either expand or renovate. We would need to expand in the front as far as we can to the road there. The kitchen and cafeteria, and then also the administrative space. And then we would build a new addition, which just would be a physical education space and a new media center, connected with kind of a commons here. And this is very, 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 very conceptual. But the beautiful thing about this sits on the existing property, doesn't affect any of the existing parking or drive-offs that we have there. This school actually has a lot more playground areas than the other schools. And of course, that opens up an idea. We don't need that many for lower elementary school, but you still have plenty of them in the back there as well. Okay. Let's talk about the opportunity of a new combined ECLC upper elementary school located at Trinity and Commerce. Obviously, we're sitting right over here on the corner, or you see Electric Avenue, Trinity and Commerce. This particular facility the ECLC would have an infant center for 32 infants, 1 and 2 year olds, 4 classrooms, or about 48 students. Preschool would be 6 classrooms or 108 students. Pre-K would be 13 classrooms or 286 students. And then, of course, all the administrative and support spaces. The upper elementary would have 10 classrooms for 250 students, an administrative suite, and they would share a new media center, multi-purpose space, and a kitchen and cafeteria. On the physical education side of it, what we talked about, and there's a lot of discussion that would have to be had, will be able to use the existing gymnasium, because our physical education happens during the day, and there's not a whole lot of activity in that gymnasium during the day. So that would be one way we could actually save some money, and obviously, work with the city and partner there. So what does that look like? This is the first floor. So as you can see in the blue, those are the classrooms for the age groups. In the middle there in white is the infant center. Then we have a lab, art and music suite. A little blurry to it. This is the media center, multi-purpose and cafeteria. And this wall, I believe, would be better suited as a kind of a wall that could be closed, opened up, so you could have a different. If you needed to have like a large event, like for some kind of a school activity or presentation to the whole school, then you could do that there as well. We talked about the fact that we have playgrounds. I know that the city is going to want us to have green space as much as we possibly can. So our idea would be to try to incorporate our playground areas as part of that, and then parking. You can see the drop off and pickup would be off of Tuning Way on the back. And the queue actually works pretty good back there as well. On the corner, you can see where you have a main entrance, and then you'd have the joint administrative spaces, one on the left, one on the right, so that at least you could go into one entrance, and you can determine which school you were going to at that point. Then the second floor would be the upper elementary school. You can see the different classrooms, additional art and music, teachers, admin space, and so forth. The other thing too is that while we're not showing classrooms here, we would certainly want to try to study at least having our structural system design where we could expand there if we needed to grow that particular school and add on to that floor. How about that? And this is just a conceptual design of what that could look like from the street and from the area. Different sides. That's that main entrance we talked about.
Where would the Oliver House be? The senior living facility?
It's back behind. So if I go back to the plan, this is a good one. Basically, this is Tuning Way right here. So it's located right there. It's just they didn't put those buildings in, but it's located right here. So obviously, I think you had some ideas about the central location and what that does to us from a demographic side and from walkability and so forth as well. All right, so we'll move on to Fifth Avenue. Fifth Avenue, the current capacity is 487. Physical education gym is too small at 2959. The kitchen is too small, cafeteria is too small. It needs additional staff parking and bus queue and drop-off space. And it needs improvements to the play space. The playground area gets so much use. I mean, it just stays dirt. There's just grass won't work out there. So what we're suggesting we consider is a classroom addition. It would be 12 additional classrooms, bring up our capacity to 700. Expanding the gymnasium by a little over 2,000 square feet to get us to the 5,000 square feet. Expanding the cafeteria and the media center into the old cafeteria. Building a new cafeteria commons area. Placing a synthetic turf playfield out there. and doing approximately 24 on-site parking spaces and additional bus queue or drop-off. We could determine which way we wanted to do that. So what does that look like? Generally, so where you see where it says expand kitchen, serving and media center, that's the existing cafeteria now. So we would basically split it and give half of it to the media center and half of it to kitchen for additional prep and serving. And then the area that we're showing as new commons, that's that kind of open air area space between the buildings right now. We would enclose it. We would certainly have a lot of glass on the side facing the playground areas. And I would like to have like an atrium effect where you get a lot of daylighting into it as well. This could be used for cafeteria functions. It could be used for all different types of functions. So it would be done in a way that would be multi-purpose. You can kind of see this one's a better one. So in this one, you can see where to expand the gymnasium, you have to expand into the existing drive aisle and parking. So basically what we're doing is we are expanding and blowing out this wall, expanding out, and it gives us our 5,000 square feet. We're still able to keep parking here, parking along here, but this red box right here is where the existing modulars are right now. So those would be gone. And the fencing runs about right here on the property. So this would be where we'd have a new drive aisle, 12 parking spaces on both sides, and then an exit. So traffic would become one way. And we would either use it for bus queuing and have the bus pickup be here, or we could do it the opposite and let the vehicles, parents pick up and drop off on this side. It gives us the options on that. And then this would be the new 2-story classroom addition. We would have a new covered ramp that would connect the building here, so you'd have more of a linear kind of outdoor, but covered connection between all the spaces. And then we would make this a synthetic field here. Of course, that would still have the playground areas, but the field itself. That's just looking from like the roofs. I just wanted to show you how we could actually pop that up and get glass above us and get daylighting coming in like an atrium effect. And this is at the high school. The intent would be to add a 8,000 square foot physical education gymnasium and an 18,000 square foot classroom addition. This will provide us, the classroom addition will provide us 13 additional general classrooms and 3 CTE classrooms. This is basically, this is the media center, cafeteria, kitchen, open area here. Right now, this is kind of a lot of dirt, as you said there on the side. So the intention would be is we carve out that dirt, put a retaining wall in, and actually build that addition right there for the physical education space. That's kind of what it could look like. And then the classroom building will be on the corner right there at Howard and McDonough Street. And it would have a covered, obviously, conditioned connection between it and the main front building. It's just the different floors. And then this is the athletics, the Legacy Park track and field. This is as the plan has been put together by the city. It has a synthetic turf field size for soccer, but can be set up for football and lacrosse. It has an 8-lane track, broken back competition track. It has long jump, triple jump, high jump, all the events that you need for track and field. And then 500-person capacity bleachers and event plaza, and And then, of course, future field house there. And then the idea would be that we could split that cost with the city at somewhere in the range of $2.5 million or something. So I've thrown a lot of stuff at you, but this kind of summarizes the numbers on the last sheet. So on the lower elementary, to address the Winona Park Elementary renovation expansions, we're estimating that to be around $5 million. The College Heights conversion would be about $7.5 million. Now, likewise, when we looked at the basically making Winona Park a larger lower elementary, the numbers were about the same. So there's not a whole lot of difference in cost to go in that direction if you wanted to. The numbers stay pretty close. The upper elementary, the combined ECLC and upper elementary is roughly $24 million. The renovations and expansions at Fifth Avenue is estimated at 9.25. So all in, that's $33,250,000 estimated. The high school for the PE building and the classroom addition is estimated about 8.5. And athletics, our share of it is estimated to be 2.5. So if you did everything, which I realize that's what we'll talk about, we're talking about somewhere in the range of just under $57 million. And, you know, if you go back and think about our last master plan that we did, I think just addressing what we did for the high school, the middle school, and some of the minor renovations to the other schools. At that point, we estimated about 125 million. We ended up spending just under 90 million to get all that accomplished. So, I mean, I was kind of, I know it's a big number, but in the scheme of things, to address all the growth that you would need, plus all the additional needs that you'd have, I think it's a reasonable number as well.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
It's very good.
So I think for kind of just conversations, I think the first one of the things that I think to talk about first would be the new early learning center. We know back in 2017, the city, DHA, and City Schools of Decatur entered into an agreement when that land was purchased, that would be the kind of the designation for that. And I think it's time for that project to get up and going. We see a need for it. We know that creating a nicer space for early learning will also enhance opportunities for our equity work when we look at providing early learning for the students in our city that need that early learning opportunity. So to me, that's one of the non-negotiables on this is I kind of look forward to like what's next. I think the other ones are need to have. The level of need to me is like what's our comfort level with how
Eat.
need, NEED, need. Yeah. Like we need them, but how much do we need them? Discussion and how, like, is it this 5-year plan? Is it the next one? What's our comfort level with putting modulars versus going ahead and doing this as we have the SPLOST resolution pending on the ballot? So I think first let's talk about the ECLC idea and kind of go from there. But sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a question. So if we just were to do the ECLC without adding the upper elementary to it, and we put the money then towards just building out the other 2 schools, is the suggestion that we do both of those things, that we build out the other 2 upper elementaries and have a third, or one or the other?
Well, obviously that could be done in a phase, but
Right.
you're going to get, if there's any point in the say in the next 5 years that you're going to want to have the upper elementary located in that building, now's the time to build it.
Sure.
Because it's only going to get more expensive to come back and add it down the road. One, escalation in cost, and then on top of the fact you're working on top of the existing building. It's not impossible, it's done all the time. It's a little more difficult for schools because now you're working on top of an operating building every day, and that gets problematic. So even if you didn't do anything more than just shell the space for the future, that would be to me, that would be the minimum that I would do, is building the ECLC with a shelled space that could be built as a combined upper elementary. The real issue you run into is the only other option you have is we have the space that we can expand Tally. But now Tally gets to be, almost as big as the middle school. And so the question is, and then it's about how do you district to get that many kids there, and are you now got, so it gets a little, cumbersome there.
Yeah, the tally plan, you're right, actually had planned for the future and
That's right.
expansion. So we have that option. I'm going to back up to your initial question and say, I agree that I think the ECLC is a priority, but I see a lot of challenges, and I feel like combining it with an upper elementary presents challenges, not only to the physical building, but also I feel like it deters from the mission of the ECLC, because I feel like for a lot of reasons, like to best service our community and for equity and to provide more seats at the ECLC, also to make it financially self-sustaining, which it is not now. We're actually subsidizing it to the tune of $1 million a year. We need to add more seats to the ECLC in order to make it self-sustaining. And I see like you're skipping even lower elementary, like to put the teeny kids with the upper elementary kids, means you're gonna have different size toilets, different size bathrooms, different size of a lot of things, different heights of water fountains, I don't know. Also different size play equipment. It's not the same play equipment for a 3-year-old as it is for a 10-year-old. So I see a lot of challenges there. And to me, it's not my preferred option. So if I were to go back to the initial question, what would I prioritize? It would be the ECLC, not a combined ECLC upper elementary for those reasons and maybe others. Not to mention, it could maybe be smaller then, less expensive, maybe more realistic. Maybe we could actually do it sooner, have a little more green space. Having the main entrance on the corner where there's no parking, and that's where people are going to go in, also seemed problematic. Like it almost needs to be inboarded, put the main entrance where all the parking, where people can actually go in and out, because that's a very busy street right there. And I don't think we want to contribute to what's already a pretty congested downtown traffic pattern. So anyway, maybe not combining it.
Okay.
And in doing so, being able to provide maybe instead of just 286 pre-K seats and 250 upper elementary seats, what if we had 500 ECLC seats?
So one of the problems is those kids have to be on the first level.
Okay.
They
Well,
can't
then,
be
yeah.
on
Well,
a
then maybe
second.
it's smaller. Maybe the answer is less density. And then we have more green space and we really focus on maximizing the number of kids we can have there.
And I think the beautiful thing here is to recognize whatever we do, this is a concept.
Yeah.
But the concept will absolutely, even if we, whatever direction we go in, we will absolutely have to turn on architects and designers, and we'll have to work through all that process to determine
Yeah.
exactly what it is. There'll be specific requirements the city will have that maybe, change some things.
Right.
So there'll be an opportunity for doing just that.
Yeah. And revisiting, I'm sure this will be looked into by committees and the board, but how many, what's our priority? Is our priority infants? Really? Is it 1 to 2 year olds? Is it preschool? Is it pre-K? Because those numbers could shift and we could have more or less of, emphasis on the different age groups, depending on what our priorities as a school system are and where we think there's a need and where we're going to provide the most educational benefit. And I was also thinking, right now, there's the Fraser Center at the high school. Is that to remain, or will that be folded in with this ECLC?
That was one of my, that's one of the questions we'll have to
Yeah,
kind of
because we
iron
could
out. Yeah.
recoup space at the high school if that's not there.
Right.
And then we maybe don't have to do as much, add the additional classrooms at the high school, if we can recoup the Fraser Center at the high school, move those kids, like have it be, it makes sense to have it in one place when it's only a block apart. Because they're gonna be duplicating services in both of those centers. So that's another thought, because it's kind of a shell game, like removing kids and spaces. I'll pause there and let other
I
people
don't
talk.
disagree with you philosophically about the early childhood. I'd like to see some numbers about the spaces, like what is the capacity? How many more students could we serve? What's the demand? I know
Capacity for,
the current ECLC
Oh.
versus what would it be there?
It doubles the
It looks like a
capacity.
small
Doubles.
space. Okay,
it's
great.
doubling our
But What's
capacity.
the waiting number? Like, I remember with my first child, we never got in. The second one.
Same here.
They were extra spaces.
Yeah.
It just was, there it
Yeah.
wasn't even an issue. And so, and I'm not trying to anecdotally get in it.
No,
I'm
no.
just saying, we have a chart we paid people to do about what we could serve and what we couldn't serve.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're asking for our opinion about $24 million on something that is costing us money every year. I'd like to know what that is and what that means before
Yep.
we move forward with this.
Mhm.
Have the same, coming from the same place. I would like us to be very deliberate about sizing the ECLC.
Okay.
For 8 years, we've been talking about the ECLC.
Mhm.
We bought that property specifically at the site for the ECLC. And the vision, long-term vision was that we were gonna make as many seats as we could. So that people who wanted to be served by the ECLC could be served, and there wouldn't be a waiting list. Number one. And number two, that we could get enough seats so that the paying folks could subsidize and we could provide better subsidies to make sure that the people with benefit most would actually get served by. There were two objectives. One was, right now we have paying parents who can't get in. And number two, we're not reaching the population the thing we built to serve. And the solution, and we did a rate study when we looked at what the subsidies needed to be and what the tuition needed to be. And it was the more seats, the more room, the more flexibility we have. And so I'd like to go back. We had a committee that looked at this and spent a lot of time on it. I'd like to go back and look and say, and right size the things. What's the right size that's going to meet our objectives, and then plan around that. And I do think it should be kind of the first. We've been talking about it for so long. It's so important to so many different things. that we need to do.
Exactly.
It should have kind of the first spot. and
Yeah,
then figure that out.
Definitely. Then we can figure everything else out after that. Yeah.
Do you know who was involved in that study?
Dig it up.
Okay.
But there was a parent committee that, anybody else remember? There was a parent committee
I
that.
remember it, but I don't remember.
Who was on it? Yeah.
We can dig it up from. There's what a search little minutes or something. It was a good committee. They were well.
Sure.
You know, they did a pretty smart analysis.
Okay.
I was wondering, I was wondering about, well, I know this is kind of out there, but I'm concerned about closing the Fraser Center because of the high school program, students who work with, those students with their pathway and just kind of logistically, you know, because they would, you know, I think they go back and forth from Fraser Center to their classes, and having to leave the building would be maybe kind of challenging. And then I was wondering if we folded the Fraser Center in with the ECLC, seems like that would potentially, if there's a need for us to have more seats and we fold those in, and that's going to take seats away. And I don't know, it seems like it would be kind of counterintuitive to do that.
Unless we keep the ECLC College Heights also.
Right.
I mean, maybe we don't close that. And that's getting to some other thoughts I had about. I mean, we have a lot of capacity at the lower elementary level. That's not really where the problem is. Like, many of our schools are just at 67%. Claremont, 66%. Glenwood, 63%. Oakhurst, 72%. Westchester, 80%. That's still a lot of capacity. So I don't really see a burning need to build another lower elementary. So maybe we keep College Heights as College Heights. That costs nothing really, unless we want to update it a little bit. and then we have all those extra seats, and we built a new ECLC, different sides of town, different traffic patterns, reaching different communities, really, that might be something to consider.
Mhm.
We still would need to address the overcrowding of Winona, but that line between Oakhurst and Winona, we've redistricted that back and forth. That one is something we could always flex if we need to reduce the number of students at Winona and push them over to Oakhurst very easily, because that's been done already probably 3 times since the year 2000. Then we can, we can improve Winona. We have, just, I guess my point was, we have lots of capacity, actually plenty of capacity for lower elementary levels. So maybe, to your point, Jana, if we want to maximize the seats, we keep it.
I hadn't thought about that. Oh, no, I was just saying I hadn't thought about keeping both of them. And we've never really talked about it. So how does everybody else feel about that potential option? It sounds pretty good. Yeah. Right. And so that would answer that question of capacity. I think we're all on the same page of keeping the ECLC with no additional, older students there.
Can I ask a follow on that? Would you also then want to maximize both locations as far as the capacity?
The upper,
No, ECLC. at both locations.
oh,
Getting ahead of ourselves. I mean, now we need to know how many seats
Yeah,
we
what-
want and need.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't feel like we can make a decision.
No, I wouldn't say a decision, but I'm just as a. thought
just
process.
conversation, yeah. Because I don't think we could build too big of an ECLC, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't think that would necessarily become an issue, because we have a lot of our families that are going to some of those other elementary schools in our neighborhoods, or, other daycares and things like that. So a lot, because they don't have options to be in the district. So I think if we were talking about potentially wanting to keep both buildings and what that could potentially do, I think that would, at least going down that path, and like you said, see what that could potentially look like. I can't see that would be
It has to
too
be
much.
funded, though, because we
Well,
don't get-
of
we
course,
don't
everything
get
has to be
normal
funded.
state funds. I don't, for the ECLC, which is the issue. So
Well,
to just say the more seats, as many as possible, is going to put us in the hole. So we have to balance.
We have to balance it.
And there's
unless-
that tipping.
unless
oh, I
College
was-
Heights were
go ahead.
just pre-K, and we do get funding for pre-K, right?
Mhm.
So what if we
Oh.
took all the infants in the preschool and that was only combined in the new one?
Mhm.
For
And then
example.
college has.
That's what I
And
thought
then-
I had as
And
well.
then expand College Heights to just make it all just pre-K, so that you can serve more pre-Kers on that side of town, and that helps our funding. That doesn't hurt our financial situation. Like, that would make our numbers probably serve more students who need it, and also get the funding we need to serve those students.
And pre-K students can ride a bus. The idea of creating a centralized location to house more of the 0 to 3 students is that they can't ride a bus to that. So we want to make sure they have a place to go that is walkable for a lot of the families that we want to provide that service for. And there is that tipping point. So we're going to have to, I'm doing a study of really pulling those numbers is important, because people are going to top out, like they're only willing to subsidize early learning for other students to a point of financial stress for their own family. So we have to decide how many what is our number, and then how does that number then kind of tip? And people say, nope, I'll go to the Baptist church, or I'll go to the Presbyterian church because this is too expensive.
Right, absolutely.
And
So we've got to find that middle ground there.
College Heights is located kind of nicely in the middle of the south side. So if it were just a pre-K and we served more pre-K students, it is rather walkable from a pretty good radius down there. That's not so walkable to
To-
downtown
yep.
location. So
Okay.
Right. It seems like we've got a lot of, we need to be smart about that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of analysis.
Correct. Yeah.
Related, completely unrelated to what you presented, but it's a question that I had in one of our middle school writers, which is a question of bathrooms. I just wondered while we're talking about facilities, What would the cost be, and should we consider retrofitting some of the existing facilities, as we touch a school, go in there and make the bathrooms gender neutral? We tried to tally, we got halfway there, apparently the DOE got some kind of exemption. So the bathrooms, I think cafeteria are gender specific,
Mm,
the bathrooms on the other side
or
are genderless.
gender neutral. Mhm.
But my question is that something we should think about if we're renovating buildings? I don't know how much money we're talking about.
I think, I don't know that I would invest a whole lot of money in creating gender neutral bathrooms. And I have several reasons for that. We have designated gender neutral bathrooms at the middle and the high school. Elementary school, I think we could talk a little bit more about that. But I think designating some ones that are, and in the high school, they do have certain ones, in the middle school as well. I think advertising those so students know they're available and know where they are, and have them, be a commonly used restroom for students is my preference for that.
Wow.
I'll be honest, I think we see a lot of there already are some issues at our middle school where a male is going into a female restroom and intimidating girls.
That's the point, have a genderless restroom. I'm not saying the restroom that everybody uses. I think the ones at Cali Street are single enclosures, so you don't have kids mixing them.
Right.
So you go and you shut the door behind yourself and you go out and wash your hands at the common sink.
Outside of the common
Yeah,
sink.
yeah.
So the point is to remove those issues, not
That makes it open
I
and.
think you also need a space where females feel safe, where they're with only other females.
we're not communicating.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to accomplish. And
But because the bathrooms that you're referencing, Louis, are single bathrooms. Right, so you would, when you go into them, are you walking down a hallway and then there are single doors?
if I remember correctly, yes. So you go down, and I do think there might be a girls wing and a boys wing, but there wouldn't be. Because each one, it's like individual stalls. But they're actually rooms.
Yeah.
Top
Yes.
and bottom.
They are.
Floor.
Yeah.
So once you're in there and you're home.
Mhm.
And the kids would mix in the hall, but again, whether the halls are gender specific or not, all you're doing is.
Yeah, I know middle school kids, and I know that, yes, it's nice to have some of those, but I think you still need an opportunity for some spaces that are, girls don't have to worry about being confronted. If they're not comfortable being confronted, even if it is just coming in and out of a door.
It's open. There's like a half wall, there's no
I-
door.
Yes,
So
I know,
there-
yeah,
You can like see in from the hallway to
Mhm.
the sinks and everything, so it's pretty open.
yeah.
So I don't know,
Yeah,
but maybe touching the bathrooms and making them nicer, maybe we also
Yes.
can consider that, and this could be a part of that conversation. It really probably would come down to renderings and visiting tally and whatever, the board and committee
Mhm.
feel, but from a construction point of view, it might be the time to do it if we're gonna do it.
An estimate of what we think lost income will be?
Yeah, about 40 million, we're thinking. So if you want to do everything here, yes, I would recommend a bond. It's a good time to do a bond if that's something that the district would be interested in for the long term to get things started.
And it seems like the FAE expansion takes care of most of the capacity issues that we heard about in the middle, unless we want to revisit changing the K through 3 back. I'd be willing to entertain,
Uh-huh.
just so back of the map and that's
Yeah.
almost most of it. It does look like changing FAE to 700, that alone, so.
Yeah, Fave is
That-
at, I
that-
mean,
that
they are
gives you
struggling
a-
at
gives you
Fave.
a lot of capacity down-
Yeah.
down the road.
Particularly if you're willing to, oh my gosh, I'm not to throw a can of whatever into the, but particularly if you're willing to play with the limit of faith boundaries.
Mhm.
Right, exactly. So if you
Right.
play with those boundaries a little bit, Does everybody kind of think that that was pretty sound,
The favor.
the phase?
So I did have a question.
Uh-huh.
On the slide, when you were talking about that, it said the capacity at phase is 487. But on the slide, when you're looking at facility utilization projections, it says capacity is 661, which sounds more like what I remember. And I'm just wondering, how are these
Yeah.
capacities calculated? And I don't remember seeing the number 47, and I'm wondering where that came from.
So 487, the numbers that I'm using are tied back to the DOE definitions of what
Yeah.
a student per space.
Okay,
Mainly because I'm trying to make sure that we meet all their minimums,
okay.
so that we can get our reimbursement funds from them.
Can you flip to the slide called facility utilization projections, please? There we go. So where are those capacities? What do those capacities mean? And is tally? I just thought they were more closely aligned with one
I'm not
another.
really sure where we're getting 742 and 661.
That's from the cooperative
What I actually
strategies.
did too is I went back to the last 5-year plan that was submitted to the DOE.
Okay,
And that report, we have to establish what the capacity is using their definitions. And that's the numbers. of that.
yeah. I'm not going to remember this correctly, but I do remember there was sort of like an official definition that was calculated one way, maybe based on number of square foot per
Per
room,
student.
per student. And then there was another number, which is maybe that number of really how many students would you put in that room? And I think we need to be looking at the really how many students would you put in that room number if we're comparing to how many actual students we have in the building and whether all the seats are full or not. And I'm just wondering, like, is that tally number the DOE number, or if that's not, if those numbers aren't the DOE number, what would the apples to apples be
Yeah,
like if they
I
just
know for a
already
fact that the Tally Street number is, you're not at 742 based off where
Yeah.
we landed on that one.
Okay, so I guess I'm just confused about
Yeah.
what the capacity really is and what that means and how we calculate it.
But you are right, that we went, and there was this, I know that it's one of the things that previous superintendent did. Came up with completely different capacity numbers that were not DOE numbers. I think the DOE numbers, we opened Renfro and had an empty Renfro wing for a fairly extended period of time. When the charts were showing we were over capacity, we had an empty wing. And so it's just evidence that we need to get the the DOE formula is formulaic. It's not particular enough to know what we're doing.
Well, I guess the question is, whether or not it's 61 versus 487, we still are at capacity. And we still have an additional number of students that are projected based upon this report that they're saying that we're going to have to bring on board somehow, some kind of way. I'm not trying to negate what you're saying. And so if existing school was 661, because we're using our numbers,
Yeah,
we still have a capacity.
well, we're
Which
at a-
means that, right.
yeah, but it's a much, then those capacity numbers are much less alarming. Because if it's 661 and we're, right at about 100% 5 years out, well, that's 100%. It's not over capacity, but it's at capacity. And I don't like, it's so close that it would make it more difficult to want to, to say, yes, we need 7 new classrooms or whatever it is at $7.5 million. Like we
Well,
need to really
if,
get,
if both of them were over capacity, then that would be, I could see your point.
Well,
Because now you've
yeah.
got flexibility, but they're both
right
both
at
in there, or right
capacity.
at or over.
Yeah, like, but right, like, I'm just saying they're not, I'm just saying it makes a big difference between 661 and 487. If we're using those, what is, that's 100 and,
I wonder if that 661 is coming from the modulars that used to be at Save. Because
Yeah, I
it's,
just don't know.
yeah, I think it is, because there's no way that building alone holds that many kids. It had to have been that building with the modulars. Yes, that's, yeah.
I don't know who did what parts of the plan before, but it seems like we could just ask.
Yeah, I've got some notes here to pull some of those numbers. The other thing I did want to raise to the board, and I'm glad we're back on this slide because I meant to bring this up, is what's the appetite of the board to simply redistrict our lower elementary zones to create general, like move Winona Park lines to send more of those students to Oakhurst, to send more to other schools instead of adding. There is some need at Winona Park to update some stuff, but do we look at it and like keep ECLC where it is as another ECLC, add another one, and then redistrict some of Winona Park to address this overage in Winona Park?
Yeah, I think that would be I think that would be the way to go. Yeah, that should be the first consideration.
Yeah, and we are, I mean, we are gonna need some additional classroom space at secondary, at this upper elementary. So it's from what I'm hearing from the board, it's more appetizing to add some classrooms at Fave. Now we've got to look at specifically where those numbers, where that lands, that 485 or the 661. So I will get the final, and we'll kind of take another look through those numbers. We'll look at some opportunities to redistrict parts of our lower elementary lines to see if we can adjust these and make that a little more appetizing. It saves, if we can redraw a line and save $8 million, that makes a big difference.
Yeah, because the neighborhoods are gonna grow at different rates at different times. And we may, there's a lot of, we need to look back at the wonderful reports that Heidi Watley's
Yes.
putting together, because we do have right about 1,000, if that's what it was, I think I remember 1,000 permitted high density units coming on board, which will have some kids, and they will be in different pockets of the city. So over the next 10 years, that population may shift too, and we may not end up needing, what if we didn't need all those classrooms at Winona, but that one's maybe a little more flexible to redistrict.
One of the things to consider too is that some of your elementary schools, lower elementary schools, I mean, they are maxed out.
And that's,
Like
yeah.
Oakhurst would be a good example. They don't have a lot of opportunity
To do anything additional.
right.
Westchester, you need to do a little bit of,
You mean the physical
the
building?
physical building
Maxed
itself,
out,
the site.
Yeah.
Piece of property and facilities that you have there now.
And it's maybe good that the spaces at Winona, considering that so much growth is happening on the east side, but in the interim, until we know that, and we can redraw some lines, that might be.
That's the first
Okay.
one.
High school, I think we do need to start thinking of high school. And an idea I've kind of had in my head when I was thinking ECLC, building property here, is, thinking a little more outside of the box and thinking more innovative. Jeff's going to kill me because I didn't bring this up earlier. But thinking about if we're really wanting to dedicate and build our college and career academy, could ECLC have the lowest floor ECLC, but the top floor be more opportunities for college and career academies? The kids, kitty corner from the high school, it's easy to walk over. They've got to kind of have a back and forth, but scheduling some of those where they would be there in the morning, walk over to the high school at lunchtime, have lunch, and have the rest of their classes there in the afternoon to really build out some of those. Really, there are some great programs. I mean, there's film industry here that we can partner with. We've got medical careers we can partner with. We have a lot of opportunities, I think, to really enhance our college and career academy. And if we're looking at maximizing space, and if we need more classroom space at the high school, can we move college and career and build out some really amazing spaces for those programs that are specific, like if we want to do a flight simulator, like things like that, think really strategically and innovatively. And then some of those classrooms at the high school can transition back to classrooms. So that would take the need away from adding space there. So just
That's kind of a good.
Before I did that, not to say that you wouldn't maybe also do that, I would certainly Bolden Fraser. Because if
Yeah,
we were worried about
yes.
kids walking back and forth or just, I think we're close enough that high school students can.
Yeah,
well,
they
you know, 'cause leave
definitely.
Campus anyway, and go to
Mhm.
part-time programs
Yep.
and work programs and whatever. I thought you were also going to say something about integrating the high school students, like if there's some, teacher training or opportunities to, have programming with the younger kids,
Mhm.
that could also
Yeah.
be a neat collaborative
Yep.
angle.
Yep, definitely.
well.
Yep. The other thing I like about if we think innovatively for this space is then opening it up for after hours type education for adults. So keeping a high school under lock and key is very difficult, but when we have a more succinct building, what opportunities could we have to engage with adult education programs that are within a single facility instead of trying to maintain the 700 door locks at the high school? Can we have some opportunities to think a little more innovatively with what that space could look like? One of the things I want, the second floor, I want to make sure we understand, we think about the opportunity of that space and building up and how we can use that to support some long-term innovation as we look forward into our charter as well.
Yeah, It's exciting, especially considering our location near downtown and near Decatur Housing Authority and what kind of programs we can have that support our very local immediate community here.
Okay. All right, so I've got some tasks to do. I don't want to call this out, but the Braves game did start, first pitch of the World Series. You guys know I'm a huge sports fan and a big Braves fan. So I've got some notes here on pulling some information, looking at some other options. Definitely hearing that desired ECLC, and I think we owe that for for our city and for the work that we're doing. I think that's essential. So I think that is, number one. And so
I have
I
one
think-
more comment. And I
Go ahead.
respect
Yeah.
what you said right there. I'll say it quickly, but I do remember when we were building Tally, we had some very passionate parents who were very protective of the play space.
yes.
And also the same. And now when we're talking about building additions, knowing that the play space is very limited there, I think we just have to be cognizant of how we can
Mhm.
maximize
Yeah.
and preserve as much of the play space as possible, because you will hear.
We will hear.
Yeah, Vegas is a good example where I remember years ago, we looked at an option where we would expand where the existing playground is right now. And there was two things. One, there was stormwater retention underground that was there, and then it was the playground. And so that just really kind of did not work well. What I liked about this option is, while yes, it is on playground space, it really doesn't get that much use. They really use that for the other corner. I'm not saying they don't use it, but if we can put a more multi-purpose turf on it, where there's always something great for them to play on.
Yeah.
Then I think you'll
Be used even more.
year-round.
It would, but yeah. Yeah.
And Sergio and his team thrive.
Yeah.
I mean,
They
we're
do.
in there.
Yeah, they really do.
Sort of related to that, related to the very angry email that we got today before the meeting. I do think that we need to be clear and like, I'm not, it's too hard to have like pictures and show where the gym is going to sit. At this stage of the process, and it seems like, when people want to talk, people want to discuss needs, people want to discuss all this stuff, and then they want to be presented with options. We just present the map and say, this is what we have. And you can qualify it and say it's conceptual. Now everybody, we're gonna be getting emails saying, I don't want to be on the hill. And it just seems like we need to get the procedure right. We need to tell people what it is before we start showing pictures of maps, so that we don't. I just think we need to be real sensitive to that.
We need to slap like conceptual design, not really happening yet, like draft.
That was the master plan that was presented. back
Yes,
in
it
December.
was.
The original master
Mhm.
plan. I
Yes.
just pulled it back up.
Yeah, it was there. Along with, what did ROTC fields along the side too is on there. Draft, first iteration idea. This is just to get the brainstorm going. No, they don't believe it. Yeah.
And
Okay.
maybe a mention of the process to come and.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
Well, this is exciting. I mean, I think it's wonderful that we're, as much as there is to say, there's just as many questions as there are answers at this point.
Mhm.
But it's a wonderful points might be, and so really appreciate this.
Mhm.
Brings it to light.
Yeah,
And Jeff does this as a, this is his career planning for
Mhm.
school districts and helping them, make sure we reach capacity,
And I've worked here since 2007.
Mhm.
This is part of me.
So, yeah.
This educator is part of me. So
Thank you,
I
Jeff.
take a lot of pride in it. So.
Appreciate
Absolutely.
that. Okay, all right. Any other questions? Oh, budget, last conversation. So as we look at preparing the budget conversation, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate
Thank
you.
you.
The budget presentation it's our November work session. Just making sure I get a read from the board on what are any things you want to see in the presentation, what are questions you have about as we move forward, so we can make sure that we are getting all those I's dotted and T's crossed when we get up to that budget presentation for the board. Now, we've got kind of our template we've used in the past and going through that, but are there any specifics that you guys are going to look for as we start looking at budget priorities in particular for the board? Is it really looking at, we've got our compensation study coming to you in December. So is competitive pay a huge priority over class size, or is keeping class sizes at our lower rates more important? So those are some of the things we're going to have to talk about. We know the bucket of money is the bucket of money that we have. And if we want to do both, and we're going to have to get a bigger bucket with more money. So we've got to really talk about prioritizing when we have to say, this is what we can do with the funds we get through revenue. And that's pretty kind of fixed. What are the priorities? We want to do this over this. So we're going to have to really talk through those. So really looking for you guys to give me some information on what are some of those ideas, so I can start crunching some numbers with Juanita about saying, hey, if we want competitive pay, this is what class sizes will look like, because we can only fund competitive pay to this level without increasing class size.
I'd like to actually see that comparison. Actually, probably would help
Okay.
my decision making, to see if it makes sense, how much
Like
bigger
how,
will the
like if
classes
we add
be?
2 kids to a class, we can increase class staff salary by X amount. So
Right,
those kind
exactly.
of numbers.
Mhm. Yeah, that
Okay.
would work for me.
And then the positions, didn't we have something like 15 or 16 positions to temporarily reduce class sizes? So maybe
Yeah.
like relative to what class sizes were, not just
Yeah.
where they are now, because now they're kind of artificially low.
Yeah.
So if we're increasing by 2, maybe they're still not even back to where they were. So maybe like
Mhm.
provide a little bit of a perspective of a few years.
Yes.
And also, I think a comparison to what is typical, like outside our district, so
Yeah.
that like we get in our perfect little world of what we think would be ideal, but also what's
Mhm.
our baseline, maybe is a
Yeah.
better word for it.
Yes. Okay.
So that we can put it into some perspective, because
Okay.
if you say you're gonna increase by 2, that sounds bad, but it's maybe pretty good if it's less than where we were and much less than where we could be.
And
Yeah.
much less where everybody else is.
And there's
Right.
gonna be a balance.
Okay.
We'll know more about the senior tax exemption then too, so that'll be a budget piece that will fall
Yeah.
into place.
Mhm.
We should probably mention the SPOST and how important it is to our school district, and exactly for these capital projects that we're talking about, not just our school
Yeah.
district, but all of the CAB. and
Yes.
How badly we need it to
Uh-huh.
maintain our facilities,
Yep.
and hopefully, people will recognize that we are actually planning very carefully to maximize our buildings and keep them well maintained, and that supports our students, which supports our whole community. And that it's so important, and also just make sure people are aware about the senior tax exemption that is now on the ballot, both of these things on November 2nd.
I was thinking about, I know Christy Beam had done a big presentation recently about some of the different programs that, I think it was Chris Beam, who was about the different programs that we have implemented, and kind of to help with remediation and to provide support and things like that. And so, I'm wondering how the impact that those programs are having. I know that during the last school board meeting in our packet, we had all the reports from the different schools, and the gap on the achievement gap on most of those tests, there was a big gap between Black and white students. And whether we need to do more, put money to do more to try to close that gap.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
so the intercession programs, the summer school, the Launchpad for Learning camp.
Right, right,
Yep.
right.
Okay. Okay. Anything else you guys want to see in that?
Oh, my train of thought of the, like, the teachers we hired and just the
Yes.
attrition.
Mhm.
Maybe it's too soon to really know if we are having any
Yeah.
attrition there, but just we weren't going to replace those. And so
Yeah.
that budget item is going to slowly come back down. across
Correct.
your-
Exactly.
so
Yep.
just having around
She's already
there.
got that one in the
Going.
works. Yeah.
Awesome.
And subs.
Mm,
Oh, so, yeah. Yeah, that's huge.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
do we have, I mean, is there, what can we do? Is it all around the pay where we're having an issue with subs, or is it
Sub-
more than that?
Yeah, subs are an issue nationwide. This is not a
Mhm.
Decatur issue. This is a nationwide sub shortage issue. That superintendents are talking about sub shortage in transportation and school nutrition workers.
Okay.
Are a
Okay.
job shortage across the nation. And this comes up on all the forums that I'm on for superintendents nationwide. So it is one of those that is not a Decatur issue. Our pay is competitive for subs. We have a decent, a good salary, $145 a day to come in and be a substitute teacher. I look and started tracking our daily attendance for staff. And I've talked about this with our teacher advisory council, is what's causing the need for so many subs. So to me, this is a systematic, fundamental issue as a school system, is why are our teachers out so often? What do we need to look at for why that's happening? Are they overworked? Are they burnt out? Do we need other supports in place? How do we support our teachers so they are ready to come to work every day instead of just trying to give more subs? Because adding more subs, paying more subs is, to me, not fixing the issue. The issue is we need to work with our teachers and understand what's happening system-wide to have them feel like they're ready to come to work. I get it. Having been a classroom teacher, being in a first grade classroom for 45 minutes, I was ready to call for a sub. It's a lot. So I want to make sure we are supporting our staff so they want to come and are ready to come to work every day. So to me, that's a big issue.
Yeah.
A lot of
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
goes back to budget, because with smaller class sizes, and if we can afford to pay for parents, it makes it for a more, a more enjoyable.
Yes,
But
when you have an
it's all
assistant, it's a lot. It's very helpful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
I looked at Also, when you look at pay, I mean, we talked about this before, but really it incorporates total compensation.
Yes,
And it
correct.
incorporates the retirement. It
Mhm.
incorporates the option that we offer, which is the courtesy tuition. It also
Mhm.
incorporates some of the qualitative aspects
Yes.
of working where we have a full-time nurse because we pay for that extra.
Mhm. Yeah.
We have a
a lot
full-time
extra.
librarian in our training schools because we pay for that extra
Yeah.
above and beyond
Yes.
what the state gives us.
Mhm.
And, so many different things, which I know it's not in the dollar or in the paycheck, but it is in the overall job satisfaction. And so
Mhm.
when we're looking at pay and total compensation, I feel like these qualitative factors are important to list and share with the community to say, this is a conscious decision, because if we had a part-time this and a part-time that, we would have more money in our
Mhm.
bucket that maybe could go to increase salaries, but all around, and again, it's a balance. And how are we balancing having a place where people want to come to work with also paying them as much as we possibly can?
Yeah.
So,
And I guess I'd also be interested to know, because I know pre-pandemic, I know during the pandemic, there's hiring, shortages everywhere, in every industry. But pre-pandemic, subs were an issue. Now, I don't know if it was still an issue that, I guess I'd be interested to know, like, our average teacher absences, how does that compare
Okay.
to, state and national averages?
Okay.
I don't know if there would be a different even during the pandemic for absences.
Yeah.
But I know that it was particularly at Renfro, that was a big thing. And we had a rotating schedule and we had
Oh,
a
yeah.
council planning period and all that good stuff. So I'd be interested to know how we compare.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll see what I can pull for that. I know I can get our sub data. I'll look and see what we can find. And when you look at data that the state starts reporting and sharing, and when I look at what I pull from Frontline on our daily attendance rates versus what shows up in their system, they never match. And I'm always like, why does that state? So I'm always cautious to report out. So I'll see what I can try to get to be comparative. So we should be able to be in the ballpark at least.
Okay.
Speaking of ballparks. All right, thank you, board members. I appreciate all your input, and we'll give you another round of presentations and go from there.
Sounds
Have a
good.
good night.
We are adjourned.
Thank you
Have a good night, guys.
very much for
Thanks.
all
Good
your
night.
work.